Okay, so we're going to continue with our Holy Week readings. Today's Wednesday, and we're going to read the Gospel, and it's going to be Luke chapter 22 through chapter 23. So it's a rather long reading, but oh my goodness, this is all the good stuff. So here we go. Luke 22. The festival of unleavened bread, which is also called Passover, was approaching. The leading priests and teachers of religious law were plotting how to kill Jesus, but they were afraid of the people's reaction. Then Satan entered into Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12 disciples, and he went to the leading priests and captains of the temple guard to discuss the best way to betray Jesus to them. They were delighted, and they promised to give him money. So he agreed and began looking for an opportunity to betray Jesus so they could arrest him when the crowds weren't around. Now, the festival of unleavened bread arrived when the Passover lamb is sacrificed. Jesus sent Peter and John ahead and said, "Go prepare the Passover meal so we can eat it together." "Where do you want us to prepare it?" they asked him. He replied, "As soon as you enter Jerusalem, a man carrying a pitcher of water will meet you. Follow him. At the house he enters, say to the owner, 'The teacher asks, where is the guest room where I can eat the Passover meal with my disciples?' He will take you upstairs to a large room that is already set up. That's where you should prepare our meal." They went off to the city and found everything just as Jesus had said, and they prepared the Passover meal there. When the time came, Jesus and the apostles sat down together at the table. Jesus said, "I have been very eager to eat this Passover meal with you before my suffering begins. For I tell you now that I won't eat this meal again until its meaning is fulfilled in the kingdom of God." Then he took a cup of wine. He gave thanks to God for it. He said, "Take this and share it among yourselves, for I will not drink wine again until the kingdom of God has come." He took some bread. He gave thanks to God for it. Then he broke it into pieces and gave it to the disciples, saying, "This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." After supper, he took another cup of wine, and he said, "This cup is the new covenant between God and his people, an agreement confirmed with my blood, which is poured out as a sacrifice for you. But here, at this table, sitting among us is a friend. It's the man who will betray me. It has been determined that the Son of Man," Jesus' favorite name for himself, "must die. But what sorrow awaits the one who betrays him." The disciples began to ask each other which one of them would ever do such a thing. They began to argue, and then they began to argue among themselves who would be the greatest among them. So first they're wondering which one of them is going to betray Jesus, and then they start arguing about which one of them was the greatest. Jesus told them, "In this world, kings and great men lord it over their people. Yet they're called friends of the people. But among you it will be different. Those who are the greatest among you should take the lowest rank, and the leader should be like a servant. Who's more important, the one who sits at the table or the one who serves? The one who sits at the table, of course, but not here. For I am among you as one who serves." Which he's going to do later with the whole washing of the feet thing. He's going to blow their mind. "You have stayed with me in my time of trial, and just as my Father has granted me a kingdom, I now grant you the right to eat and drink at my table in my kingdom. And you will sit on thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Simon, Simon," which is Peter, "Satan has asked to sift each of you like wheat. But I have pleaded in prayer for you, Simon, that your faith should not fail. So when you have repented and turned to me again, strengthen your brothers." That had to blow his mind. What'd I do? Peter said, "Lord, I'm ready to go to prison with you. I'm ready to die with you." But Jesus said, "Peter, let me tell you something. Before the rooster crows tomorrow morning, you will deny 3 times that you even know me." Then Jesus asked them, "When I sent you out to preach the good news and you didn't have any money, a traveler's bag, or an extra pair of sandals, did you need anything?" "No," they replied. But now he said, "Take your money and a traveler's bag, and if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. For the time has come for this prophecy about me to be fulfilled. He was counted among the rebels. Yes, everything written about me by the prophets will come true." "Lord, look," they replied, "we have 2 swords among us." "That's enough," he said. I don't know if he's like, 2 swords is enough for 12 guys, or, all right, that's enough talking about swords. I don't know. One of the two, maybe both. Then, accompanied by the disciples, Jesus left the upstairs room and went as usual to the Mount of Olives. There he told them, "Pray that you will not give in to temptation." He walked away about a stone's throw, knelt down and prayed, "Father, if you are willing, please take this cup of suffering away from me. Yet I want your will to be done, not mine." Then an angel from heaven appeared and strengthened him. He prayed more fervently. He was in such agony of spirit that his sweat fell to the ground like great drops of blood. At last he stood up and returned to the disciples, only to find them asleep, exhausted from grief. "Why are you sleeping?" he asked. "Get up and pray, so that you will not give in to temptation." But even as Jesus said this, a crowd approached, led by Judas, one of the 12 disciples. Judas walked over to Jesus and greeted him with a kiss. Jesus said, "Judas, would you betray the Son of Man with a kiss?" When the other disciples saw what was about to happen, they exclaimed, "Lord, should we fight? We brought those swords." One of them struck at the high priest's slave, slashing off his right ear. I'm sure he was actually aiming for his head. Jesus said, "Hey, no more of this." He touched the man's ear and he healed him. Then Jesus spoke to the leading priests, the captain of the temple guard, the elders who had come from him. "Am I some dangerous revolutionary," he asked, "that you come with swords and clubs to arrest me? Why didn't you arrest me in the temple? I was there every day. But this is your moment, the time when the powers of darkness reign." So they arrested him, and they led him to the high priest's home. Peter followed at a distance. The guards lit a fire in the middle of the courtyard. They sat around it. Peter joined them there. A servant girl noticed him in the firelight and began staring at him. And finally she said, "This man was one of Jesus' followers." But Peter denied it. "Woman," he said, "I don't even know him." After a while, someone else looked at him, said, "You must be one of them." "No, man, I'm not," Peter retorted. About an hour later, someone else insisted, "This must be one of them, because he's a Galilean." Peter said, "Man, I don't know what you're talking about." And immediately, while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. At that moment, the Lord turned and looked at Peter. He was nearby. And suddenly the Lord's words flashed through Peter's mind. "Before the rooster crows tomorrow morning, you will deny 3 times you even know me." And Peter left the courtyard, weeping bitterly. The guards in charge of Jesus, they began mocking and beating him. They blindfolded him. They said, "Prophesy. Who hit you that time?" They hurled all sorts of terrible insults at him. At daybreak, all the elders of the people assembled, including the leading priests, the teachers of religious law. Jesus was led in before the high council, and they said to him, "So tell us, are you the Messiah?" But he replied, "If I tell you, you won't believe me. And if I ask you a question, you won't answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated in the place of power at God's right hand." Who sits at the right hand of God? Who is in that place of power? The Messiah. So, yeah. They all shouted, "So you are claiming to be the Son of God?" And he replied, "You say that I am." That's another way of saying, "You said it, not me." Yes. Why do we need other witnesses, they said. We ourselves heard him say it. Then the entire council took Jesus to Pilate, the Roman governor. They began to state their case. This man has been leading our people astray by telling them not to pay their taxes to the Roman government. That's a lie. And by claiming he is the Messiah, a king. So Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus replied, "You have said it. You said it, not me. Yes." Pilate turned to the leading priests and to the crowd and said, "I find nothing wrong with this man." Then they became insistent. I think Pilate knew that they were like, there was something fishy going on here. I don't think he was a fan of the religious leaders. They were a pain in his side. And he was seeing through this. They were trumping up charges on Jesus, and he didn't want to have anything to do with it. That's what's going on here. They became insistent. But he's causing riots by his teaching wherever he goes, all over Judea and from Galilee to Jerusalem. Riots! I don't know, man. I haven't heard about any riots. Oh, is he a Galilean? Aha, Pilate asked. When they said that he was, then Pilate sent him to Herod Antipas because, he's a Galilean. He's not under my jurisdiction. Galilee was under Herod's jurisdiction. So Herod happened to be in Jerusalem at the time. In Jerusalem. He sent him over there. Herod was delighted at the opportunity to see Jesus. That is not the reaction they were hoping for. The high priest, the council, they were not hoping that Herod would be pleased to see Jesus. He had heard about Jesus. He had been hoping for a long time to see him perform a miracle. He asked Jesus question after question, but Jesus refused to answer. That had to be frustrating. Meanwhile, the leading priests and the teachers of religious law, they stood there shouting their accusations. Chaos. Then Herod and his soldiers began mocking and ridiculing Jesus. They put a royal robe on him and sent him back to Pilate. It says here that Herod and Pilate, who had been enemies before, they became friends that day about this Jesus thing. Then Pilate called together the leading priests, the other religious leaders, along with all the people, and he announced his verdict. You brought this man to me, accused him of leading a revolt. I have examined him thoroughly on this point in your presence, and I find him innocent. Herod came to the same conclusion. He sent him back to us. Nothing this man has done calls for the death penalty. So I'll have him flogged, and then I'll release him. I don't want to kill an innocent man if I don't have to. Mighty roar came up from the crowd, and with one voice they shouted, "Kill him and release Barabbas to us." Barabbas was in prison for taking part of an insurrection in Jerusalem against the government, and also for murder. Pilate argued with them because he wanted to release Jesus, but they kept shouting, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" For the third time he demanded, "Why? What crime has he committed? I have found no reason to sentence him to death. I'll have him flogged, and then I'll release him." But the mob shouted louder and louder, demanding that Jesus be crucified, and their voices prevailed. So Pilate sentenced Jesus to die as they demanded. As they had requested, he released Barabbas, the man in prison for insurrection and murder, but he turned Jesus over to them to do as they wished. As they led Jesus away, a man named Simon, who was from Cyrene, happened to be coming in from the countryside. The soldiers seized him and put the cross, probably the cross bar, they put that on him and made him carry it behind Jesus. Now, why did it mention Simon from Cyrene? Why does it mention this guy? probably because he was still around at the time that this was written. And it's like, look, I mentioned Pilate, I mentioned Herod, I mentioned Caiaphas. These are real people. Go ask them. This really happened. A large crowd trailed behind, including many grief-stricken women. Jesus turned to them. He said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, don't weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children. For the days are coming when they will say, 'Fortunate indeed are the women who are childless, the wombs who have not borne a child, the breasts that have never nursed.' People will beg the mountains, 'Fall on us.' They'll plead with the hills, 'Bury us.' For if these things are done when the tree is green, what happens when it's dry?" 2 other criminals were led out to be executed with him. When they came to the place called the Skull, they nailed him to the cross. And the criminals were also crucified, one on his right, one on his left. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." He continued to say, "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." The soldiers gambled for his clothes by throwing dice. The crowd watched. The leaders scoffed. "He saved others," they said. "Let him save himself if he's really God's Messiah, the chosen one." The soldiers mocked him too. They offered him a drink of sour wine. They called out to him, "If you're the king of the Jews, well, save yourself." A sign was fastened above him with the words, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals hanging beside him scoffed, "So you're the Messiah, are you? Prove it by saving yourself, and us too while you're at it." But the other criminal protested, "Don't you fear God even when you've been sentenced to die? I mean, we deserve to die for our crimes, but this man hasn't done anything wrong." And then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus replied, "I assure you, today you will be with me in paradise." By this time it was about noon. Darkness fell on the whole land till about 3 o'clock. The light from the sun was gone. Suddenly, the curtain in the sanctuary of the temple was torn down the middle. The people stopped mocking. Jesus shouted, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." And with those words he breathed his last. When the Roman officer who was overseeing the execution saw everything that had happened, it says he worshipped God and said, "Surely this man was innocent." When all the crowd that came to see the crucifixion saw everything that had happened, they went home in deep sorrow. But Jesus' friends, including the women who had followed him from Galilee, they stood at a distance, watching. Now there was a man, a good and righteous man, named Joseph. He was a member of the Jewish High Council, that council that had determined to do away with Jesus, to have him killed. But he had not agreed with the decision and the actions of the other religious leaders. He was from the town of Arimathea in Judea, and he was waiting for the kingdom of God to come. Well, he went to Pilate, and he asked for Jesus' body. He took the body down from the cross, he wrapped it in a long sheet of linen cloth, and laid it in a new tomb that had been carved out of a rock. This was done late on Friday afternoon, the day of preparation, as the Sabbath was about to begin. As his body was taken away, the women from Galilee followed, and they saw the tomb where his body was placed. Then they went home, and they prepared spices and ointments to anoint his body. But by the time they were finished, the Sabbath had begun. So they rested, as required by the law. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.